Welcome, Marlon here. Today we'll be making this beautiful 3D Christmas tree. You might also enjoy this tutorial. Find the link to this project in the description box. But now on to today's version. I colored my cookie dough white, decorated it with a few candies and some ribbons, and now on to the step-by-step tutorial. Here is my prepared cookie dough. I actually added the white food gel to the butter as I was creaming it with the sugar to just facilitate getting it in there, since I knew I wanted the whole batch in white. This cookie cutter set has 10 cutters. All right, to explain, it's a little kind of confusing what I'm doing, but there's 10 cutters. If we number them 1 to 10, 10 being the largest and 1 being the smallest, I'm pairing number 10 with number 5, and number 9 with number 4, number 8 with number 3, and so forth. And it's allowing me to get 2 cuts in 1 cookie. Normally you'd end up with this huge cookie, which is kind of not really practical, hard to bake, and just too big. And I'm cutting this part here. I'm getting the 2 cookies, using up less dough, easier to bake. So I'm just putting saran wrap on my dough here, just so that I get a nice edge when I cut. Putting that, and now I'm centering the little one. Cutting the little one first, because this is room temperature dough. When I press into the dough, I'm forcing it out. It's pushing out. Leave the shape there so that when I cut now, the dough doesn't go in. It's protected. And now I'm cutting the outer star like so. It's a little bit tricky. This is like chintzy plastic with the saran wrap, but just press through. And now we can lift this off, and you'll see what it does. It gives you a really nice rounded edge on the cut. Now don't you touch the shape, you're just removing the excess, and you can pick up the cookie with the parchment paper and put that in the freezer. You do not want to handle this room temperature dough. You're going to mess up the star. Now to add some shine to these cookies, I've got here my cut cookies. They're frozen. And I'm using water. It's important that you use water, just simply because if you use egg, you will cause some browning on your dough. And we're trying to get this as white as possible and avoid, therefore, the egg. It'll just dingy up the finish. I've painted on some water on the tips here of my cookie. And now I'm working in a bead tray to catch my leftover sanding sugar that falls. And I've got a grill there just in case I want to set my cookie down. I don't want it to lay in the sanding sugar. And there, I'm getting my sparkle on the tips there. Try not to get your hand in the sanding sugar. And just shake off the excess. It's hard to see on the camera there, but I've got the sanding sugar. Here are the smaller star cookies. I've cut a center hole there just to facilitate everything being assembled. I'll have that kind of center. And now, since these are a bit smaller, I'm just going to lay it on the grill here and sprinkle the whole thing. Shake off the excess. And there is our blinged up cookie. Here are the cookies. I wanted to show you the fade, the size fade here. You see they gradually get smaller, and we can see here the sanding sugar, a nice little festive look. And I'm going to be decorating this in blue with these. This is 6 slits. These are chocolate coated candies, and these are just like pearls, and these are actually gum. And so they kind of have a slight size variation. I'm going to go larger to smaller. And now I've divided them by 3, and I'll be decorating each layer with the different sizes that I have here. Here are my first batch of cookies. I'm going to flip them over here And we're going to be actually adding the decoration to the underside of these. This is really easy. All I'm doing is adding a dot of icing, like so. And then on top of each of these dots, I'm adding one of these pearls. And we're going to let this dry before moving on. Like that. And that's it. Now I'm working on the next size up. I'm adding my royal icing to be able to attach, this time, the chocolate sixlet to the cookie. And I decided for structural that I'm adding here inside, just to make sure that everything is well supported. And so here I'm adding 5 of the same, just so that when everything is stacked, there is good support in between each cookie layer and there won't be any collapse. And now the final layer. For the inside structural, I'm going to be using the chocolate, which are slightly smaller. And then for the tips of the stars, I'm using the gum. I just don't want the spacing in between the layers to be too big. If I use the gum, it'll expose too much of the center of the actual tree. I'm just using the sixlets. There we go. I'm going to build it on a cake board. I'm just gluing the base cookie onto my cake board here. Make sure that it's nice and attached, and then we'll be able to build our tree on there. I got some ribbon to go with my project, some nice snowflakes and some kind of blue see-through. And now this stick is 12 inches, so I'm just going to make it a bit longer than that. I've cut up my ribbon in 6 pieces, and I'm laying the kind of see-through one under the snowflake like so. And now I'm using a lollipop stick, and I'm just, it's a little bit tricky. I'm putting it on the lollipop stick like so, wrapping it kind of around it. You can see the lollipop stick is sticking out a little bit, but it's just to make sure that it holds on. And now I'm using a twist tie to secure all this, silver twist tie. And now inside here, I'm just flipping over the ribbon. I'm just adding a little piece of tape right here to adhere everything to make sure that it doesn't come off the tree. There, so now the bow is attached, and it's just needs to be like spread open. It's going to open up the bow like so. Here's the insert for the tree. This will slip down those holes we made, and these ribbons will be on the outside, kind of draped in front of the tree, and this will be the topper of the tree. Now for the assembly, the trickiest part is just making sure that everything kind of goes up straight. And here is my first layer. I'm just going to flip that back over and add a drop of icing to each of these little sixlets so that they stick to that base cookie, so that obviously you can transport it. But you don't want to have so much icing that should anybody want to eat this, it's going to be a nightmare to take apart. You want it to be able to be enjoyed. And we're just going to build this all the way up. A few things happened as I was assembling this. The candies did sometimes detach from the royal icing. The sixlets didn't embed in the royal icing like candies usually do. So that was a bit of a pain. The next issue that I encountered was my cookies were a little bit soft, and so they did curve slightly, which was a concern. If you have high humidity, that could cause a collapse. But the major thing I want you to consider is where you line up the structural candies. Because I cut holes in the centers of each cookie, those little candies would sometimes line up and fall into the hole and so cause the tree to not be perfectly straight. And there is my topper. I think that it's quite cute. It gives a much more narrow tree than the other version and taller, which is a different look. Here is the finished product. You can see the little candies hanging underneath. Just want to repeat that the candies were very temperamental and did flick off if you touched them in the slightest. It wasn't too hard to fix though. I added a dot of royal icing and glued them back on. The version I made back in July was slightly easier and less temperamental. Structurally, I think it was better. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future uploads, and I'll see you next time.